Let's see if we can get you a really good understanding of learning plateaus. And I always get a bit nervous around this word because somehow the spelling confuses me. I think we may have the French to blame for that. Anyway, this is what it is when learning stops progressing despite ongoing trials. So I just want to draw some attention to that. So something we're trying to do stops improving despite us keeping going. All right, so despite us doing some practice, some stuff, it's not getting any better. Now, a beautiful way to actually illustrate this is graphically, and I know you lot out there absolutely love a graph. You've done plenty of them in your time, in your maths, in your geography, in your physics, etc. So let's see if we can sketch one out here. On the x-axis, we have got trials. Now, you might be wondering what this word means, trials. What do we mean by that? By trials, we're talking about attempts we've made to perform the skill. So let's say that I'm talking about a basketball layup shot. It would be all the individual attempts at me performing that thing, okay? So it's the number of times I actually have a go at it, right? So imagine how many times, let's say, the ball goes in. This line might represent 1,000 attempts to do that. This one being the very first one over here and the very last one over here, right? That's what we're talking about. And what we're saying is on the y-axis, we are talking about performance. But I like to think about it as performance quality, but it could also be, I suppose, effectiveness, but that's a detailed point. Now, this is where I want to get with things. I'm going to sort of build this curve. It's what we call an S-shaped curve, if you're interested. I'm sure you've come across F-shaped curves elsewhere. But I just want to make sure that we understand the components of this. First of all, when we start learning something, we might find the shape of the curve is a bit like this. Notice that the origin of my line is not at the actual origin. That is because, let's say we're trying to score a layup or throw a ball, similar I guess, whatever it happens to be. It's quite unusual that someone has got no performance quality. They can't pick the ball up, say. Could happen with some individuals, but it's quite rare. But what we find is that when learning starts, or when trials first begin, we find, generally speaking, that the early stages are quite slow progress. Okay, now, I don't think that'll surprise you lot too much. Yeah, when you try something, it's kind of hard to begin with, right? But once we sort of get a little bit of fluency with it, what we'd expect might happen is something like this. Now, that part of this curve, what that represents, this is what we'd call linear progression. Okay, now linear progression, basically, each time you attempt it, you get slightly better, slightly better, slightly better, and that development happens in a linear fashion. And what we'd find sort of later on is that, and this is what we're going to talk about, is this sort of orange bit now, is as this carries on, we get this sort of plateau effect at the top, this leveling off. And what this orange bit represents, this is our plateau. And again, I want to be clear on what this means. We've got no or little additional quality despite effort or despite ongoing trials. Despite trials, let me just put it in here, despite trials. So look, trials are progressing, we're doing more and more and more, but we are not getting better at it. Okay, now that is what a plateau is. Now, where I'd like to go from here, apart from being able to sort of identify the parts of that curve, and by the way, you don't necessarily, it doesn't have to be an S-shaped curve in its entirety. We could have a situation where a skill just goes like that. Okay, it's linear progression all the way through. It's possible. You might even have a situation where performance goes like this, where the performance quality goes down over time. Could this explain sort of the aging process, for example, where we actually get slightly worse at some things when we get a bit older? So it doesn't have to be the shape, but it's sort of indicative of what we're going to talk about today. Now, the thing I'm really interested in, or 2 points I'm really interested in today, first of all, are the causes of a plateau. So let me be specific, of a plateau. So why would learning effectively stop happening? So what are the causes about that? Well, the first one's kind of obvious. Poor quality teaching / coaching, okay? So if the coach, obviously it's not me as I'm teaching now, I'm an legend, clearly. But if the coaching quality is a little bit whoa, what does whoa mean? Whoa. If the teaching quality is a bit questionable, let's put it that way, I'll have to check what that means. Then obviously that's not going to lead to good learning. Goes without saying. What about if the performer is not physically able? You know, if we're asking someone, let's say that someone's been practicing with turbo javelins to throw a javelin, those sort of foam ones, and then they're moved on to an 800-gram javelin. That could be something that they're actually not strong enough to go about doing, right? That could explain it. What about if the task is too difficult? So maybe the person has been moved on to do something which is under more difficult circumstances. Maybe the trials now are including, let's say, a defender, say. What about if the goal is not achievable? Okay, goal not achievable. So we've effectively not used our SMART principle. If you haven't studied that, don't worry, you'll get to it, to actually set an appropriate goal. What about if the individual's reached full potential? What about if I go back to that curve, reach full potential? What about if this is actually, hang on a sec, what if this is actually here the best this person is capable of? They can't get higher than that performance quality. Now, I don't like to think about things that way. I like to think myself an educator and everything's possible. But I guess sometimes that would be the case, right? I guess ultimately I've got a limit on how high I can jump in the high jump. You know, I guess there is that. The other one, and this is really important, is that it could be that the mental model of the skill has not been formed. Now think about this, of the skill not formed. So think about this in relation to things like your knowledge of guidance and visual guidance. Think about this with regard to your cognitive stage learners. If the mental model has not been formed, maybe they don't know how to sort of go about repeating that model. They need that stimulus. And folks, to be honest with you, this sadly is the one that I think is the most common, and it relates to poor quality of teaching and coaching as well. But one of the big ones is boredom. We can use the word tedium, and we can use the word lack of motivation, or term lack of motivation. Now, it would be interesting if we happen to teach what's called drive reduction theory. It would be useful to mention that here, because drive reduction theory is always about setting a challenging and relevant goal. That tends to stop boredom. But sadly, we don't do drive reduction theory on this particular course, so we'll move on swiftly from there. Now, to finish this tutorial off, I want to talk about solutions. So if I was to say these are solutions, these are ways of shortening the time of a learning plateau. These are, for example, the ways to preventing a learning plateau. What would those factors be? Well, let's just go through obvious things. Introduce difficult tasks slowly. Okay, so we don't want to sort of overwhelm someone, difficult tasks slowly, with something that they're ultimately going to really struggle with. We want to do that. But also, can I stress, it would be after what we describe mastery. So move somebody on to the next task once they've really mastered something and they can build on top of that fundamental. Secondly, set a goal that's achievable. Now again, this of course relates to our goal setting, our SMART principle, but an achievable goal should not be difficult to achieve, right? What about this one? Set individual goals. Very often in sporting environments, we tend to find that the goals that are set are team goals. We've got to go out and win the second half. Well, how does the individual know to go and contribute to that goal? That's more of an example of an outcome goal, really, but you know what I mean. Let's go forward. We want to coach at high quality. That obviously addresses the point we made before. So, you know, coaches, that's really important for us. And there will be students out there coaching as well at the moment. But we want to be continually reflecting and improving what we're doing so that we're refining and getting better. We want to provide demonstrations, not always, but when it's relevant, demonstrations. And of course, this is to address the point about the mental model. The demonstration of the skill will give the performer what the thing is supposed to look like. And that can really help them to move forward. Last couple of things from me. We really like the whole part whole model for this. Now, if you haven't got this whole part whole method, if you haven't got to whole part whole yet in your studies, it basically is the idea that we do a practice as a whole. We break it into its parts, and the parts that you practice is where the error is. So you refine and improve that error, and then of course you put it back together, and hopefully then the trial will be better. And that leads me to this last point, which is please, coaches, correct errors. Okay, correct errors. And specifically in subroutine. So if there's one subroutine, let's say the leg action in your breaststroke technique is causing a problem, go and address the error, and then the whole thing can move out of the plateau stage. So I hope that's useful to you. Just want to come back to that sort of main view at the top. It's this that we're trying to limit, shorten, eliminate, prevent. We know the causes now. We know the methods of achieving it. Thanks.